Hey everyone, welcome to the open world of Warcraft, where we're 100% focused on open world PvE content in World of Warcraft, things like leveling, world quest, and delves. My name is Setsuko, and in this video, I want to go over the Mage class talent tree and just take a look at each of the different talents, tell you whether or not I think they're valuable in open world content, and we'll just kind of go from there. So we're going to start out by taking a look at each of the different starter talents for our different specializations. For Mage, each starter talent is the same. It's a barrier, but the element is a little bit different. So for Fire Mage, we're going to have Blazing Barrier. This shields you in flame, absorbing damage, and melee attacks cause the attacker to take fire damage. For Frost Mage, this is going to be a shield of ice, absorbing damage and increasing your armor potentially here. And melee attacks against you reduce the attacker's movement speed by 50%. And then Arcane Mage has Prismatic Barrier. This shields you, absorbing damage and reducing magic damage you take. And then the duration of harmful magic effects against you is reduced. So for all three specializations, you're going to want to utilize your barrier regardless. So let's get into the first full row that we have here, starting with Ice Block. So Ice Block is an ability with a 4-minute cooldown, pretty long, that encases you in a block of ice, protecting you from all attacks and damage for 10 seconds. During that time, you cannot attack, move, or cast spells, and this causes hypothermia, which prevents you from recasting Ice Block for 30 seconds. Now, there are some ways that we can get the cooldown of this down, and there are some ways we can augment it to make it better. Whether or not you pick it up is kind of up to you, but you kind of have to grab it to get down into most of this left side of the tree. So for me, that basically makes it a mandatory pickup, even though a 4-minute cooldown is pretty long in open world content. That said, playing on a mage, unless you are top of your game and you are a absolutely fantastic mage who is freezing and crowd controlling and everything else, there's a good chance you're going to get beat on a good amount, and there might be a time when you really want to cast Ice Block to prevent yourself from dying. So pick it up on all specializations. Next, we have Overflowing Energy. Your spell critical strike damage is increased by 10% when your direct spells fail to critically strike. Then you gain critical strike chance by 2% up to 10% for 8 seconds. And then when you critically strike, it resets. Just a really good pickup here. The critical strike damage is nice, but basically getting increasing critical strike chance until you crit is really, really good. Then we have Incanter's Flow. Magical energy flows through you while in combat, building up to 10% increased damage and then diminishing down to 2% increased damage, cycling every 10 seconds. So this means you always have 2% increased damage, but it gets up to 10% increased damage. Just really nice to have as well. Again, all three of these to me are pretty much mandatory for all mage specs because they're going to lead into the rest of the tree. Going to our next row, we have Winter's Protection. You can reduce the cooldown of Ice Block by a total of 60 seconds here, bringing it down to 3 minutes. I do think this is worth picking up because 3 minutes is a much more reasonable cooldown for open world content for an ability like this. So in my opinion, unless you just never use Ice Block or never feel like you need to use it, I would put this in here. Also, because of the different buffs we can add to Ice Block, it is going to become more than just a no damage ability, and we'll take a look at that here later. Next, we have Spell Steal. So this one will remove a beneficial magic effect from an enemy and give it to you. Whether or not you take this one really depends on the enemies that you're fighting. In general, this is a skip for me, but if you're in an area where there is a beneficial buff that really helps you out, if you're able to steal it, then you can pick this up. Next, we have Tempest Barrier. You gain a shield that absorbs 6% of your maximum health for 15 seconds after you blink. I do generally like this one because usually when I'm blinking into something because, I've started combat or I'm trying to blink to get away. And either way, having a shield on top of that after you blink is just really nice. So again, you don't have to take this one, but I enjoy this one and find it quite useful. Next, we have Incantation of Swiftness. This makes it so that invisibility will increase your movement speed by 80% for 6 seconds. I do like to pick this one up, not because I really use invisibility in general, but because getting it as a 6-second speed boost is pretty nice on a mage, where really the only movement speed enhancing stuff that you generally have is going to be your blink. So you can definitely skip this one if you want to, but if you have the points and you're not really using invisibility for anything else, you can use these points to turn it into a movement speed ability. Then we have Remove Curse. This removes curses from a friendly target. Again, situational here. I typically would not pick this up for open world content, but if you're fighting enemies that are constantly putting curses on you and you want that removal, you could spec into this for that. Then we have Arcane Warding. So this reduces magic damage taken by 4%. This one is okay. It's definitely skippable in my book. There are other talents for other classes that do more reduction without as many talent points. It's kind of crazy to me that we're only getting 4% and it costs 2 points. But that being said, it is just flat reduction in magic damage. So if you have the points, you could put them here. But it just depends on whether or not you have those points or want to spend them somewhere else. On our next row, we have Mirror Image. This creates 3 copies of you nearby for 40 seconds, which cast spells and attack your enemies. While your images are active, damage taken is reduced by 20%. Taking any direct damage will cause one of your images to dissipate. So pretty nice ability here. Again, all 3 of these abilities are kind of leading us into the rest of the tree. So you kind of just pick them up here, in my opinion. Unless you really are not concerned about some particular abilities. I think you would want to pick at least 2 out of 3, or maybe at least the center one, depending. Next, we have Shifting Power. 1 minute cooldown. You draw power from within, and you channel cast this to deal arcane damage over 4 seconds to all enemies within 18 yards. While channeling, your mage ability cooldowns are reduced by 12 seconds over 4 seconds. So this is one of the ways that we can reduce the cooldowns on some of our longer mage abilities. And for that reason, I think that Shifting Power is generally worth picking up for most mages, because you can get the reduction on things like your Ice Block, on things like your Time Warp, etc. You could literally use Shifting Power when you're not in combat just for the reduction if you wanted to. Obviously, it does a great amount of damage in AoE, so it's nice to set up something like a Frost Nova into a Shifting Power, because you do have to channel it for a while. But in general, I like this ability and recommend it. Then we have Alter Time. This alters the fabric of time on a 1 minute cooldown. It returns you to your current location and health when cast a second time or after 10 seconds. This can be really nice. It just depends on your playstyle, but basically you can cast this before combat, go into combat, do whatever, and if you don't cast it again, after 10 seconds, it'll warp you back to your old location with your old health, which means that it's basically a heal. And for that reason, I do think it's pretty good if you're going to set up for a larger pool. You could do this. It's on a low cooldown with 1 minute. So again, kind of a recommended pickup from me here as well. I think all 3 of these serve their purpose and they lead into the rest of the tree. But again, you could, for example, cut off, the middle one, because you still have access to most things here. You could also, cut off one of the side ones, if you didn't want these particular talents here. So it just depends. On our next row, we have Cryo Freeze. While inside Ice Block, for 2 points, you heal for 50% of your maximum health over the duration. So this is one of the reasons that I really like Ice Block with the cooldown reduction. Why I like getting the Shifting Power to reduce the cooldown again is because this is a 50% heal on a mage, which doesn't have a lot of ways to heal themselves in combat. You do have food and stuff like that you can eat between bouts, but during combat, you don't really have a lot of ways to be able to utilize healing. So I like picking these up on all mage specs just to have that 50% in combat heal. Next, we have a choice node. We can choose between reduplication. So mirror image's cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds whenever a mirror image dissipates, or reabsorption, you're healed for 3% of your max health whenever a mirror image dissipates due to direct damage. You do not have to take either one of these. If you were going to take one, I personally would take reabsorption for, again, some in-combat healing. That's what I would pick here. Next, we have quick-witted. So successfully interrupting an enemy with counterspell reduces its cooldown by 4 seconds. If we go down here and we look at our counterspell, so that's going to be a 24-second interrupt. The typical cooldown for an interrupt is going to be 15 seconds. So we're much higher on a cooldown here for our interrupt for Mage, which is really frustrating. And so for that reason, quick-witted to me is a mandatory pickup. Because interrupting a spell basically puts you on a 20-second cooldown, which is still 5 seconds longer than most interrupts, and lacking a low cooldown interrupt is just really frustrating on any class. So to me, mandatory pickup there. Next, we have Mass Polymorph. This is a 1-minute cooldown that turns all enemies within 10 yards into sheep. Take it or leave it. It's an easy pass for me because I'd rather put those points somewhere else, but it is usable if you're in an area that has lots of beasts, humanoids, or critters. Next, we have Slow. So Slow for me kind of depends. If you don't already have an ability that slows the enemy through your specialization, for example, Frost has a lot of movement slowing effects already. If you don't have one of those, then I would definitely get Slow. In order to cast that on an enemy, you basically open up with a spell, cast Slow, reduce their movement speed, and continue to hit them with more spells as they slowly wander over to you. If you already have some effects that reduce the target's movement speed as part of your rotation, then Slow is an easy skip. Next, we have Master Time. This reduces the cooldown of Alter Time by 10 seconds, so it goes from 1 minute to 50 seconds. And Alter Time will reset the cooldown of your Blink and Shimmer when you return to your original location. Not too worried about this. If you do find yourself doing big pulls where you use Alter Time first in order to kind of take out an enemy, then get teleported back and full heal and take out another one, and then take out the last one, then maybe you could pick this up so that you could do that more often. But outside of that, I would generally skip this one. Next, we have Diverted Energy. Your barriers heal you for 40% of the damage absorbed. Again, another one that I like here for in-combat heal. I would basically pick this up on every single specialization. Moving to the next row, we have a couple of choice nodes here. The first one is Ring of Frost. This summons a Ring of Frost for 10 seconds. Enemies that enter the ring are incapacitated for 10 seconds. When the incapacitate expires, the enemies are slowed by 65%. Really, really nice one here. I would pick this one up on Fire Mage. I would pick it up on Arcane Mage. Frost Mage, I would probably pick up Ice Nova. So Ice Nova is a 25-second cooldown, creates a whirl of icy wind around an enemy, dealing damage to other targets within 8 yards and freezing them in place for 2 seconds. The reason I would pick Ice Nova for Frost Mage is because generally you're going to have a lot of effects that trigger or deal more damage when an enemy is frozen, and so this gives you another way to freeze enemies, whereas Ring of Frost does the incapacitate. For the other specializations, I would get Ring of Frost because it does surround you or wherever you put the location, which is hopefully going to be something you're going to run into essentially, and it has a longer duration on that incapacitate effect of 10 seconds. So it, to me, offers better survivability than Ice Nova does, but Ice Nova has that extra frozen effect. You could skip these if you find that, you know, like your Frost Nova is doing the trick and your other defensive utilities are perfectly fine. But if you wanted another one, then I would pick it up from here. Our next choice is Shimmer or Ice Flows. So Shimmer replaces your Blink. It's a 2 charge on a 25-second recharge and teleports you 20 yards forward. So if we look at our Blink here, so our Blink is a 15-second charge, 1 charge that teleports you 20 yards forward. Okay. I personally like to take Shimmer here because I like having 2 charges of the Blink instead of 1, even though the recharge is a little bit longer here. Our other option is Ice Flows. This is an ability on a 20-second recharge with 3 charges. Makes your next Mage spell with a cast time shorter than 10 seconds castable while moving. Again, I'm not too worried about that, and I would much rather have an additional Blink. Shimmer to me is a mandatory pickup on all specializations. Then we have Blast Wave. So Blast Wave is on a 30-second cooldown. You can consider this a defensive as well. It creates an explosion around you that deals fire damage and knocks back all enemies, reducing their movement speed by 50%. This is an alternative to taking one of the choices over here, either Ring of Frost or Ice Nova, or you could double up if you want an additional defensive ability, but I don't know that it's entirely necessary. On our next row, we have Improved Frost Nova, so increases the duration of Frost Nova by 2 seconds. Right next to that, we have Frost Nova can withstand 80% more damage before breaking. Generally speaking, we're going to be getting Cryo Freeze for the heal for the Ice Block, and I would rather extend the duration that things are frozen in Frost Nova than worry about the amount of damage they can withstand before breaking. You could pick up both of these if you were going into a freeze heavy build, but for just generalist purposes, I would rather increase the time that things are frozen in Frost Nova because I'm probably using that more defensively. On a Frost Mage, I could see picking this up and also picking up Rigid Ice so that you can deal more damage to the target while they're considered frozen. But on other specializations, you know, you just want them to be frozen for as long as possible. Then we have Tome of Ronin, increases critical strike chance by 2%. To me, that's just an easy point in there. You could spend that point somewhere else, but 2% crit strike chance is pretty nice. Then we have Dragon's Breath and Supernova. So Dragon's Breath is a 45-second cooldown ability. Deals damage to enemies in a cone in front of you and causes them to be disoriented for 4 seconds. Damage they take will cancel the effect. On Frost and Arcane, this is a take it or leave it. Doesn't really matter. For fire, this is a mandatory pickup for me because it always will deal a critical strike and contribute to your hot streak when you are fire, which is a big deal. Hot streak is one of your main mechanics that increases your damage. So Dragon's Breath becomes a 45-second guaranteed critical strike hot streak that also disorients targets. So Dragon's Breath, mandatory on fire. Take it or leave it on Frost or Arcane. Then we have Supernova. This is a 45-second cooldown that pulses arcane energy around the target or ally, dealing damage to all enemies within 8 yards and knocking them up. The primary target will take double damage, basically. Again, this is another kind of take it or leave it on any of the specs, depending on what you're doing with your build. Next, we have Tome of Antonitis, increases your haste by 2%. Again, really valuable stat there. Easy point to put in. Next, we have Volatile Detonation. This greatly increases the effect of Blast Wave's knockback, and it reduces the cooldown by 5 seconds to 25 seconds. Generally, I would say this is unnecessary, and I don't want to increase the knockback of Blast Wave because then I'm more likely to knock enemies into other enemies that I haven't already engaged with. And just cause chaos. So I would definitely not take this in most situations for open world content. Then we have Energized Barriers. When your barrier receives melee attacks, you have a 10% chance to be granted one of your specialization buffs: Clear Casting, Fire Blast, and Fingers of Frost. Really nice. You're going to get hit by melee in a lot of situations unless you're just playing like hyper intense. So this is a nice one to pick up if you would like to. You don't have to pick it up, but I mean, you're going to get hit by melee attacks, and each one of the buffs provided by this is central. It's core to the gameplay of each of the specializations. All right, now we have sort of another gateway row here. So where you go with this is kind of going to depend on what section you want to go into. So we're going to kind of take a look at these as a group. So starting here with Frigid Winds. So this one will make all your snare effects reduce the target's movement speed by additional 10% with 2 points in. That one's, it's fine. It's fine. It gets you to some other stuff, and for that reason, I might take it. Otherwise, it just depends. If you're finding that you're not able to kill things and they get to you and they pound on you for a while, then maybe you could pick this up so that they're reduced movement speed even further, so it takes them longer to get to you. You have more time to deal damage to them. But there's also a good chance that your first hit snares the enemy and they're dead way before they can get to you, and this is a little bit unnecessary. Continuing on with this, we have Frost Nova has 2 charges. That's obviously really nice, especially if you're playing Frost and you're focused on a frozen build. Then we also have Freezing Cold. Enemies hit by Cold of Cone are frozen in place for 5 seconds instead of snared. Again, this one is really great if you're playing that Frozen Frost Mage build. Also, just in general, it's nice for any other specialization as well, but I don't know how much I would go into this side of the tree for the other specializations. That being said, Fire and Arcane have less ways to slow and snare targets, so maybe it's not too bad of an idea to actually go in this direction to get that increased movement speed reduction. You know, it just kind of depends. And then the capstone on here is going to be Ice Cold. So Ice Block now reduces all damage taken by 70% instead of granting you full immunity. And it's for 6 seconds instead of 10 seconds. But you can continue to move, attack, and cast spells when you cast it. Now, this in general, I do like. And if you don't have points to spend elsewhere on the tree, I would get down to this, because now your Ice Block is going to reduce damage by 70%. You can still do everything you normally would in it. It's going to heal you by 50%. And that's just going to be really nice. Okay. All right, so then we have Flow of Time. The cooldowns of Blink and Shimmer are reduced by 4 seconds. To me, that's a mandatory, just to be able to blink more often. Again, you don't have a lot of movement skills as a mage, so getting a cooldown reduction on those. And with Shimmer, you're basically getting 8 seconds off because you have 2 charges. That's really nice to have. Right below that, we have Displacement, 45-second cooldown that teleports you back to where you last blinked and heals you for some of your health, only usable within 8 seconds of blinking. You know, this one just depends on whether you can work it into your rotation, work it into the spells that you cast. If this feels clunky, then I would skip it. But if it doesn't feel too clunky, it is another way for you to get some healing. But generally speaking, I don't know. I feel like this is kind of a disorienting ability. So for me, it's probably a skip. On the left side, we have Time Manipulation. Casting Fire Blast reduces the cooldown of your loss of control abilities by 2 seconds. So that would be things, you know, like your Frost Novas, etc. This one's fine. I do find myself using Fire Blast even in like Frost Mage or Arcane Mage specs, because it's a good ability to just finish off an enemy that has just enough health left that I just need to do a little bit to them. But I don't want to cast a whole full big spell. So you will use Fire Blast at times for all specializations. But again, whether or not you want that cooldown reduction on your loss of control abilities, I think depends on the build you're playing. On the right side here, we have Accumulative Shielding. Your barrier's cooldown recharges 30% faster while the shield persists. Again, with these barriers, they have these 25-second cooldowns. And this just means it's going to cool down faster while your shield is still up. Generally speaking, this is just a nice quality of life talent to pick up, and I would generally try to grab that on most specializations, especially considering I'll definitely have gotten Flow of Time, so I have easy access to it. Then our capstone here, we have a choice between Time Anomaly and Inspired Intellect. Inspired Intellect makes it so that your Arcane Intellect gives you an additional 3% Intellect stat, which is very nice. And then you have Time Anomaly. At any moment, you have a chance to gain Combustion, Fire Blast, or Time Warp for 6 seconds. On Frost Mage, that's going to be Icy Veins, Brain Freeze, or Time Warp. And for Arcane Mage, that's going to be Arcane Surge, Clear Casting, or Time Warp. So what I would say here is, if you like that roll of the dice, you know, moment to moment things are changing sort of play style, then you can pick up Time Anomaly. If you want something more consistent, more static, something you don't really have to pay attention to, pick up Inspired Intellect. But I would definitely get at least one of these on every specialization. So that's pretty easy. Flow of Time into Accumulative Shielding into either Time Anomaly or Inspired Intellect. Over here on the left-hand side, for the most part, I'm not going to recommend most of these, but We're going to have temporal velocity, increases your movement speed by 10% for 3 seconds after casting blink and 20% for 6 seconds after returning from altered time. 2 points in, that gives you 20% after blink and 40% after returning from altered time. Again, I really like these movement speed talents, and so I would consider these basically mandatory for all specializations. Dropping down below that, we have greater invisibility, which makes you invisible and untargetable for 20 seconds, removing all threat. We already have invisibility, and for the most part, I'm going to use invisibility for 2 things. Either one, because I got in over my head and I want to remove all that threat and reset, or because I'm using it for the movement speed boost that we can get up here. That being said, I don't feel like I need to upgrade that to greater invisibility, so this is an easy pass for me. On the right, we have barrier diffusion. Whenever one of your barriers is removed, you reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds. So again, if you're heavily depending on your barriers, this could be something you pick up. But generally speaking, we're already going to get some cooldown reduction through accumulative shielding, and the cooldown is fairly low anyway. And then finally here at the end, we have a choice node between mass invisibility that makes you and your allies invisible, or mass barrier, which casts your barrier on yourself and a bunch of other allies. Again, for open world content, we're kind of working on the assumption that you're likely playing solo, or maybe with like one other friend. And in this case, these just are not worth it for a 5 and 3 minute cooldown. So easy pass on this talent point as well. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the Mage class talent trees talents in regards to their value in open world content. So hopefully you got some good information out of this. Hopefully it was helpful for you. If it was, then throw a like on the video, subscribe to support the channel, and share this with a friend who's going to play Mage in the War Within. I appreciate you taking time to watch one of my videos, and I'll see you on the next one.